What is up, you guys? Welcome back to another edition of the podcast. My name is Ramon, and this is Dad's podcast project. Today, we're playing some Final Fantasy Tactics and the gameplay. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're just listening to the podcast, well, this is kind of what I'm doing while podcasting. Sort of just multitasking. I don't necessarily feel like people want to see my mug all the time, and so this gives me something to do. Something to kind of divert my attention to while also focusing on what it is that I want to talk about or what it is that I want to share. But today I wanted to talk about 13 Reasons, a Netflix original show that is actually back in the news again. And this series was something that sparked a lot of controversy when it first came out. I remember social media was, for lack of a better description, ablaze by people's comments of don't watch this is a horrible show, I can't believe that they're putting something like this out there. And it just seemed to me like, why all the outrage? I hadn't read the book, I wasn't unfamiliar as to what the series was actually about, so because of that controversy, it actually interested me into watching the show. So my wife and I, we gave it a shot, and it's about suicide and this girl's attempt to sort of enact revenge or teach a lesson to those who wronged her or led her to this moment. And ultimately people were upset with that, as well as the two very graphic scenes that were depicted. One of which, if these are spoilers for you, I probably should have given a spoiler warning, but we're already at season 3, which should be coming up pretty soon. So I think that the time for spoilers has passed. So to the scenes that are very intense to watch, one of which is a rape scene where Hanna Baker is raped by, I can't remember the kid's name, and that sort of is like the tipping point. Like, she's gone through a whole lot, and this is what ultimately leads her to decide to then take her own life. And so the scene in question, which is why Netflix is in the news, so it took us a little bit to get here, is the fact that they are removing the suicide scene. They decided, I think that they said in their tweet or their story, that we hear you, we're listening to you guys, and we as in Netflix have decided to go ahead and remove that scene. For some, it seemed as if it was a little too graphic, or whatever the case may be. So the original scene plays out with Hanna in her home, and she draws a bath, and she then sits in that bathtub and proceeds to cut her wrists. And it's a very long scene. Much longer than I think it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable. My wife and I, we definitely felt uncomfortable watching it. It was very unsettling. But it's what happens, and it's what happened to this character in this fictional story. But from what we gather, it's what happens to people who do commit suicide. They go through this emotional roller coaster, and ultimately their life comes to an end. And one of the crazy things is how quiet the house gets after the fact. And the scene then shows the mother coming home and calling out for her daughter, and seeing that there is water coming from underneath the bathroom door. And she's knocking on the door, she's banging on the door, and she ultimately gets into the bathroom and sees her daughter lifeless in the bathtub, which I can't even put myself in that mental state as to what that might be like for a parent to walk in on something like that. And it just further drives the point home that this is disturbing. This is, I can't I can't believe that we're actually watching something like this, which I'm sure a lot of people felt at the time. I'm sure a lot of people felt that they shouldn't be exposed to something like this. And rightly so. I mean, not everybody wants to see these types of things. And, with the way that media has been lately, it's sort of putting everything out there. So what Netflix has decided to do is take the scene, remove the suicide in the bathtub, and instead show Hanna looking at herself in the mirror. And then after that, cut to the mother coming into the restroom, completely removing that suicide altogether. And I'm a little bit conflicted in how I feel about it. I understand that Netflix has gone about doing tests, talked to psychiatrists or people who have studied the matter, and they've come to the conclusion that this is not something people should see. That maybe in their efforts to, I guess, cover the story or show this, they may have glorified it or romanticized it, and because of that, they felt it wasn't something that they wanted to keep in. And I'm kind of curious about how something like this is going to affect future iterations of film and cinema as time changes, or as the overall census and public opinion changes over time. Because it reminds me of a story about Disney and Toy Story 2. In their in their post-credit scenes, they end up showing I believe it's Stinky Pete. They show Stinky Pete, and he is speaking with two Barbie dolls and asking them if they are identical twins, and that he may have a role for them in the next Toy Story movie. Now, this was comedic back when it first came out. However, with all of the hashtag #MeToo and all of these stories that are out there, it really begs the question of, was this done in good taste? And because you can stream this movie, or they're continuing to make these movies and DVDs, they've decided to ultimately just remove it from the post credits. And I'm curious, like, how is this going to change cinema as time changes, as public opinion changes, as we change as a society? How are we going to view some of the things that are coming out in film today, 10 years from now? Are we going to remove it? Are we going to keep it as its original? And the fact that they're doing this with the show 13 Reasons just goes to show that in the court of public opinion, they can get certain things removed. Now, other people do feel that this is too little too late, that the show should actually just cancel itself, like they shouldn't make this show anymore. Now, maybe season 3 will change entirely and become a little bit more softer with the tones or the topics that it covers, or the narrative that they decide to take with it. But I feel that art and cinema are a place for us to experience the unsettling in a safe environment, because it's through experience that we learn things. Now, not everything. Clearly, when you're a parent and you tell your children don't touch the fire because you're going to burn yourself, they have to take you at your word. it is just a fact, and they have to just take that information and just adhere to that rule of law. And if they don't, yeah, they'll learn from experience, but they will get burnt in the process. So when you watch a movie or you see fire victims, or you see someone else going through it, you see someone else who is experiencing that trauma or that pain, you're learning the lesson secondhand. And I think that, yes, people can argue that glamorizing or romanticizing the idea of suicide is teaching kids how to do it. But I also think another very important lesson is teaching kids of the aftermath, of the devastation and destruction that happens to a family once you leave. And that your exit or your departure does not necessarily change things in the positive. You just cease to exist at that point. And so I think that there is a lesson in that, in scaring kids, that, yeah, this is what it's like. Now, there is an age limit to which, like, who can watch this. Now, that's really up to the parents to monitor if their kids are too young to be watching something like this or this show. They've also gone and placed disclaimers, as well as suicide prevention hotlines at the beginning and the end of the show, to encourage people, if they have these thoughts, to seek help, talk to somebody, and I don't know, just don't let it get to that point, because you're not alone. And therein lies another educational point. So to just not have the show out whatsoever, to just completely and ultimately say, no, we don't want this show, don't even show it to anybody, we're not going to let our kids watch it, which is by all means your decision to do as their parent. But it kind of does a disservice, because it can be used as a learning tool. Not a learning tool of how to end your life, but a learning tool to have these discussions with your kids. I never talked with my parents about some of the dramas that I may have been going through in my adolescence. However, had they opened up that door to have that talk, to ask me, not just ask me what's wrong or what's going on or how are you feeling, but if we were to have sat down and watched a show like this, to then have that family discussion after the fact. I remember back when I was younger, we had TGIF, which was, I think it's Thank Goodness It's Friday, and there was a whole lineup of just family-friendly shows, and they would teach lessons, and there would be just happy, feel-good episodes to ring in the weekend. And it was because of these shows that we would all sit down together as a family and watch them and enjoy them. Now, television has taken quite a churn from that. I think there are a lot less shows like that. There's a lot more extreme, like slapstick comedy television or drama, or more adult-themed television shows out there. And I don't want to say that you can't necessarily watch these with your kids, but it opens up or provides you with an opportunity to have a much different conversation, to talk about maybe opening the door to have that talk about the birds and the bees, or to ask them if they think about hurting themselves, or to know what type of signs to look for. My wife and I, we are also watching, to kind of shift gears a little bit, we're also watching the show on HBO called Euphoria. Now, that show deserves an entire podcast episode in itself. That show is extreme. The first episode, like, my wife and I were sitting back like, do we even feel comfortable watching this? Like, it just felt like it was really intense. A lot of the scenes and a lot of the topics are heavily sexualized. The amount of drugs that these kids are depicted using, because they're supposed to be high school students or high school kids, is a lot. And it's a lot different than when we were in high school. I had to remind my wife that there are similarities. However, with every new generation, it's taken up a notch. So when we were in high school, there were extremes that were blowing our parents' minds, just as we were watching this show as parents, and our minds are already getting blown by some of the things that we're seeing. There are a lot more things that kids have to navigate through with regards to sexuality, with regards to drugs, with regards to peer pressures, and just all of these different avenues that, yes, my generation also had to deal with, but now with the introduction of things like social media, cell phones, and cameras, and how one little thing doesn't just go away once you go home, it lives on in the cloud, on the internet. And so if something weird happens to you, or something that embarrasses you happens online, it's there until the next sort of 15 minutes of fame story comes up to replace that one. So I'll do like probably a series review, because each of these episodes, they're very extreme. I don't necessarily feel the need to talk about each and every single one of them to try to break them down. If you are into cinema in any way, shape, or form with regards to just camera effects, lighting effects, and just the overall like camera work, I think that this series is cinematically amazing. But if you are the type that is a little bit uneasy talking about maybe certain things that should be conversations that should be had in private, or if you feel like they should be had in private, this show may not be for you. If you're uncomfortable with seeing nudity, because this is HBO, and usually if there's nudity in season 1, there's usually a lot. So this definitely has a lot of that, and enough to make my wife and I feel uncomfortable. And here we are, fans of the Game of Thrones series, as well as other HBO series that tends to have brief nudity or things like that, and it doesn't really faze us too much. But there's definitely a lot. And if you're watching the video, the light keeps going out back here. There we go. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about that though. 13 Reasons, and the fact that there is a season 3 coming out, and they've decided to go ahead and remove the suicide scene. I don't know if you've seen season 1 or if you know of the series, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that. What are your thoughts on companies or movie studios or whomever has the rights to the show going back and ultimately changing or removing something from the show? I don't necessarily feel like this isn't going to change the entire show, the fact that this scene is missing, but it is something that it had an effect. It made us feel uneasy. It triggered an emotion with myself and my wife as we watched it, and it was something that left us feeling sort of rattled. And I feel that removing that scene ultimately removes the opportunity for people to feel that emotion secondhand, and to possibly have a learning experience or a conversation starter with either the significant other or their children, for that matter. So if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to leave me a comment in the comment section down below on what your thoughts are on this. If you are listening to me on iTunes, the best way to interact with me would be via DM on my Instagram account. It is at Dad's Podcast Project, and feel free to leave me a follow, a rating on iTunes, a thumbs up or subscribe on YouTube. This is a little bit of a different format, sort of having gameplay in the background while I go ahead and do my episodes. If you're a fan of this style, let me know, or if you'd rather me just have a full-on webcam just on myself and just me talking one-on-one with a webcam, you can go back and try that again too. But that's all I've got for now, you guys. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to these episodes. And as always, till next time, see ya.